Bom dia, pessoal. Bem-vindos de volta à CheerForPeaceEXPO. Hoje nosso tema é arte. A gente vai estar falando como a arte, os impactos da arte nas comunidades marginalizadas. Desculpe. Então o pessoal está ainda fazendo uma bagunça aqui de manhã. A gente vai falar então sobre as oportunidades, as ideias, os problemas e as soluções nas comunidades marginalizadas relacionadas à arte. Então hoje a gente começa assistindo mais uma TED Talk que vai introduzir vocês a esse assunto, dar algumas ideias e fazer algumas provocações do que a arte pode ter como impacto nas comunidades e também nas cidades do futuro. Então a gente convida vocês a participarem. O vídeo é em torno de 25 minutos longo. O link a gente está postando tanto no Twitter com a hashtag CheerForPeaceEXPO, quanto no nosso blog, cheerforpeace.wordpress.com. Então, sejam bem-vindos a assistir o vídeo com a gente.
Ok. Bem, só algumas outras coisas. A arte, sobre as coisas de hoje, arte não é somente as coisas em uma galeria. Arte é tudo. E a criatividade é para todo, não? Creio eu que é uma das ferramentas mais fortes do mundo. E não é somente algo para as crianças. Todos têm o direito a participar em processos, espaços, comunidades criativos. Sobre o dia, vamos a ver muitas ideias, experiências diferentes da ideia da arte, não? De mundos diferentes, do Brasil, fora do Brasil, arte como respostas a problemas na rua ou qualquer coisa, não? Arte não somente é pintura, cores, não? É poesia, é literatura, é joking, brincando?
Brincadeira.
Brincadeira com amigos em um bar. Isso é criatividade também, não? Então, só vamos ver, não? Esse documental é de um arquiteto de Hedonistic Architecture, sobre a criatividade radical aos problemas do mundo e as soluções. Pode ser um pouco louco, não? Mas é um bom exemplo de pensando fora das limitações, não? É de um arquiteto de Dinamarca. O nome é difícil, mas B-I-G, grande, e é o nome do coletivo, do seu escritório arquitetural, ok? Yeah? We don't speak.
We do.
No. Can't hear that. Ok. Espera um momento, mas vamos a conseguir os cascos. Seu nome é Bjarke Ingels, não? E seu nome B-I e grupo é big, grande. Não? Isso é porque antes ele e seu amigo têm grupo arquitetural, seu nome é Plot, P-L-O-T. E muitos projetos muito interessantes, não? Projetos reais, mas ideias radicais, não? E é interessante ver quando pessoas veem o processo, ou estão trabalhando com pontos, identidades diferentes e estão pensando fora de todo, yeah? Okay, so
of two-dimensional facades or
okay. Yeah. It's gonna go this way.
architects have to become more than just designers of two-dimensional facades or three-dimensional architectural objects. We have to become designers of ecosystems, systems of both ecology and economy that channel not only the flow of people through our cities and buildings, but also the flow of resources like heat, energy, waste, and water into these sort of perpetual motion engines that sort of stop seeing our presence, like the human presence on planet Earth, as a sort of detrimental to our ecosystem, but actually tries to sort of integrate and incorporate our consumption patterns and our leftovers into our natural environment. The reason for this sort of expanded role of the architect is because of the atmosphere you capture in this image. It was taken at the COP15, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Copenhagen a year and a half ago. And as you can see on Sarkozy and Brown and Merkel and even Obama, it wasn't exactly a party. It was a complete failure. Essentially, none of the goals that had been established for the meeting were met, and the general sort of discussion about sustainability was sort of drowning in this sort of general misconception that sustainability is a question of how much of our existing quality of life are we prepared to sacrifice in order to afford becoming sustainable. Almost like this sort of Protestant idea that it has to hurt to do good. But sustainability can't be like some kind of a moral sacrifice or a political dilemma or even like a philanthropical cause. It has to be a design challenge. So when we were sort of recently asked to do the Danish pavilion for the Shanghai World Expo that was focusing on sustainable cities, we tried to ask ourselves if there was another sustainability than this sort of sad, depressing one. We tried to ask ourselves if we could find examples where sustainable cities and buildings actually increase life quality. So we decided to make the pavilion as a sort of condensation of how Danish cities, through their sustainable designs, actually increase life quality. We conceived of the pavilion as a sort of loop of a Danish street, complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen. Because in Copenhagen, 37% of the Copenhageners commute by bike. So people visiting could actually feel how cool it is to ride a bike through the city instead of sitting in a traffic jam or looking endlessly for a parking spot. Also in Copenhagen, our harbor water has become so clean that you can swim in it. So you don't have to like take the bus for hours to go to the Hamptons. You can actually jump in the port. So at the heart of the pavilion, we allowed the visitors to experience on their own bodies how clean, if not how cold, the Danish harbor water is. And in the middle of this sort of harbor bath, we decided to place the Little Mermaid of Denmark. Not a copy of the mermaid. We actually moved her to China. We had to wrest her out of the hands of the Danish equivalent of the Tea Party, who was trying to pass a law specifically against moving the mermaid. We had to get her through Chinese customs. And there she is. In her absence, we invited the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei to sort of install an installation. He installed a Chinese surveillance camera. It's the same Chinese surveillance camera that the Chinese state has installed in front of his house. This one, however, it was part of an installation called the Mermaid Exchange. It was transmitting a live image to a giant flat screen so that the Copenhagen tourist that lived in Grain would sort of see that she was all right. But sort of more importantly, for the 6 months of the duration of the expo, it became like this sort of the only sort of TV feed from China to the rest of the world, transmitting a sort of uncensored live footage, almost turning Copenhagen into this sort of global speakers corner for China. Sadly, Ai Weiwei has now been sort of silenced, like this sort of critical voice of China has actually been captured by the government and has been missing for the last 6 weeks. But sort of back in the pavilion, you can say, like, to sum it up, what we wanted to try to do was to show how essentially sustainable life can be more fun than normal life. And as a sort of litmus test, this is the first image we published of the Danish pavilion. And you sort of notice the red rectangle. This is the first image, or one of the first images published of Iron Man 2, showing Tony Stark's Mad Science Expo. And if you sort of compare the two rectangles, this is Hollywood and this is Shanghai. So first of all, like this is big business. It's America, the land of litigation. We should sue them and get rich. But then we thought sort of Coco Chanel said that copying is the highest form of compliment. And if Hollywood starts ripping off sustainable architecture to portray science fiction, it could be a sign that we're moving towards hedonistic sustainability. So sort of another sort of idea we've been working on to try to sort of bring this idea of how like architecture and design can actually sort of be more sort of environmentally aware, but also increase life quality. Started in a project we called The Mountain in Copenhagen. It's essentially a combination of a big parking building and an apartment building. But the parking creates a man-made mountain that lifts all the apartments up in the sun and the view, creating these sort of houses with gardens, but in the middle of the dense city. We call this idea architectural alchemy because it's this idea that by mixing traditional ingredients like parking and apartments, you can actually create, if not gold, then at least sort of added value. We took this idea one step further in a project in Copenhagen, where sort of by mixing shops and offices, townhouses and apartments, putting them in a sort of stack where they occupy their favorite position, distorting the block to sort of maximize views for the apartments and access to sunlight. We created this sort of a building we called the 8 House, named after its shape. And this sort of approach doesn't only allow us to optimize the individual position of the different parts of the program, like leaving shops and offices on the street, lifting the townhouses with gardens up into the sunshine, but it also sort of allows public life, which is traditionally restricted to occurring on street level, to actually invade the three-dimensional space of the urban block. So the 8 House in Copenhagen is not a two-dimensional facade design or even a three-dimensional architectural object. It's sort of a three-dimensional urban condition that allows public life the possibility for spontaneous social encounters to actually invade the normally private space of the urban block and reach the penthouse of the city. So this building is at the edge of Copenhagen, basically at the city limits. So you have this sort of clash of life forms. The sort of the last idea, you can say, like in the 8 House, it's essentially like a private developer project built for like private apartments and townhouses. But somehow it has this sort of generosity towards the city that it invites public life into it. This sort of idea of public participation, we took one step further in a project we did for the new city hall in Tallinn. We thought that instead of having this sort of traditional dichotomy of the politicians inside and the public outside, we would sort of hover the city hall above the ground, allowing the public to invade the ground floor in what we call the public service marketplace, where they can interact with the public servants and even sort of see the politicians at work. We called it the public village because it's essentially like an accumulation of all of the different departments have their own building. They sort of merge to form a single consolidated village. In one place, we invited the people of Thailand to sort of access the roof and enjoy the panorama of the surrounding city. And finally, in the master plan, they wanted a tower. Like in Europe, it's hard to imagine a city hall without a tower. So we thought, like, what are we going to do with the tower? We thought, like, why don't we place the city council inside the tower? So we created this incredibly generous space for political reflection. The ceiling is made as a giant mirror, so that when the politicians have to make difficult decisions, all they have to do is look up, and they get this sort of periscopial overview of the city that they're actually messing with. But as a sort of side effect, when the angry citizens gather to demonstrate, they get this sort of perfect insight. They can see, if politicians are missing, if they're sleeping, if they're playing Angry Birds. So we call it the democratic periscope that combines political overview with public insight. And to our extreme luck, the city council liked the idea, and we're now building this sort of architectural realization of radical political transparency. So these sort of 3 ideas we try to bring together in what is until now our sort of biggest biggest project. It sort of combines the sort of idea of hedonistic sustainability with the sort of architectural alchemy and the sort of notion of public participation. It's located within a master plan. We were commissioned by the 10 municipalities of metropolitan Copenhagen to do a plan according to, like, along a new train line that would connect all of the municipalities. But we proposed in return to say, why just focus on Copenhagen or even Denmark? Right on the other side of the Øresund waters, we have Sweden, southern Sweden. It's sort of the most densely populated and most sort of economically active region in Scandinavia. And by adding a single 3-mile bridge, we could actually connect it all into a sort of a single binational metropolitan region where no area is further away than 40 minutes by public transportation. And it wouldn't just be like an infrastructure for public transportation, it would also be infrastructure for waste management, for water management, for energy, combining a smart grid that combines hydroelectricity from Sweden with wind power from Denmark. It connects all of the most prosperous businesses in the entire region, and sort of by sort of merging it and making a sort of binational master plan, we also introduced pink in a flag for the first time. It has exactly the same size as the San Francisco Bay Area, so it is actually a quite likely sort of regional planning size, just because of the national boundaries. The sort of holistic perspective has never been applied. And our idea was to, instead of like focusing on the individual infrastructures, to actually merge it all so that the train line is also the first phase densification of the downtown areas. The train really stops at the heart of the different neighborhoods. And finally, since we're combining industry, commerce, and residential, we were proposing that perhaps the excess energy from the power production of the industry could become like human programs like thermal baths. So this could sound like sort of science fiction or the Jetsons, but sort of to take it to something really tangible, this is going to be the first building that we're completing within the Loop City. It's a waste-to-energy plant. In Copenhagen, we only landfill 4% of our waste. As an example, in Chicago, it's 85%. 42% gets recycled, and 54% is essentially used as fuel to create heat and electricity. 97% of the homes in Copenhagen have district heating, so they don't spend any energy on heating in a very cold country. They get it all as excess heat from the power production. And essentially they form this loop that the people give their trash to the incineration plant and they get it back as power. So as a thumb rule, 3 kilos of household trash turns into 4 hours of electricity and 5 hours of heating. And just to give you an idea of this resource, 1 ton of waste is almost 2 barrels of oil. But essentially this is a power plant like any other. It's a big, ugly, boxy factory that carves shadows on the neighbors and block the view. So the city wanted, because it's located in downtown Copenhagen, to somehow try to make it beautiful. It should be a gift to the city, said the CEO of the plant. So this is not only going to be the biggest building in Copenhagen, it's also going to be the tallest. It's going to be more than 350 feet tall. It's located right in the middle of the historical city. You can see that's the opera, the Royal Theatre downtown, and that's where it's going. It's right next to the sort of Copenhagen Marina. And right in front of it, there's something called the Copenhagen Cable Track, which is a track that pulls wakeboarders and water skiers around in this sort of perpetual loop of waterfront. And speaking of skiing, Copenhageners love skiing, but unfortunately Copenhagen is flat as a pancake. We have the snow, but we don't have the hills. So we happily go by hours on buses to the south of Sweden. So we thought, if Copenhagen doesn't have mountains, at least we have mountains of trash. So why don't we like transplant one of the Swedish ski slopes and put it on the roof of the factory? So essentially we know the size of the machines, so we create this sort of minimum envelope. They wanted to make a visitor center, which essentially is a place where school teachers drag the children to force them to listen to how trash turns into energy. Instead, we propose to install an elevator that takes you to the roof, where you can choose between a green, a blue, and a black ski slope. And because it's man-made, we can make sure that it ends up at the foot of the elevator to create this sort of perpetual loop of skiing. miraculously, we actually won the competition based on this idea. The roof material is a form of artificial carpet that all the rainwater that drops on the mountain can be is collected and can be blown out in these humidifiers that in the summer can actually create so little friction that with normal skiing equipment you can actually ski, creating this nice Brazilian hybrid of bikini skiing. But in the winter we do have 3 to 4 months of frost and snow. So from 2015 you're going to have to look out for the Danish competitors in alpine skiing. Originally the competition was to make the factory look good, so we also had to do a facade. We proposed to make it out of these giant planters made out of recycled plastics. The excess water runs through the facade, watering the plants, so that in the summer we create this natural shade that turns the working space of the factory into this nice, naturally illuminated and naturally ventilated workspace. At night you see the machines working inside the factory. So you can say the initial vision of trying to design our cities and buildings as ecosystems is quite close to materializing in this project, because not only locally does the reuse of the water, the daylight, the natural ventilation, but also in a more regional perspective, together with Copenhagen and the rest of the Loop City, the plant actually forms an ecosystem. As a last thing, they were imagining, they wanted some kind of a building integrated art project. And traditionally what you do is you hire some light artists to blow colored lights at the building at night. We thought, why don't we play with the resources we have? This is going to be the cleanest waste to energy plant in the world. The smoke coming out of the chimney is completely non-toxic, but it still does contain some CO2. A lot less than the current plant, but it does contain some of it. So we thought, why don't we design the mouth of the chimney in such a way that it fills gradually with CO2, and when it contains 100 kilos, it compresses and puffs a giant smoke ring. So we can play with it at night. But of course, on one hand, we like it because it's almost like the ultimate artistic expression of hedonistic sustainability. You take the symbol of the problem, the pollution, the chimney, and turn it into something playful. But more importantly, one of the main drivers of behavioral change is knowledge. That if people don't know, they can't act. And when my nephews ask me, what's a ton of CO2, I have to say, I don't have a clue. In 2015, I can tell them to count 10 smoke rings. And when they've counted 10 of them, we have just emitted 1 ton of CO2. So you can say the waste to energy plant in Copenhagen is not only economically and ecologically sustainable by turning waste into energy, it's also socially sustainable because it turns a power plant into a park and turns a flat land into a man-made mountain for skiing. So as a last thing, you might object that this is something that can only happen in a sunny, semi-socialist, sentimental Scandinavia. But just to wrap it up, recently we got approached by Durst Fedner, residential of Manhattan, to look at this site on the west side waterfront. It's quite far away from the nearby parks. It's right next to the Helena, a building owned by our client, named after his daughter. And normally residential in the area looks like this, extruded boxes. We thought, why don't we, having spent 10 years of my career as an architect trying to escape the tyranny of the Copenhagen courtyard as a typology, we thought that maybe in Manhattan this idea of creating an urban oasis at the heart of the block could be interesting. If you like, the Copenhagen courtyard is at the architectural scale what Central Park is at an urban scale, a human habitat surrounded by a dense wall of people. So we asked ourselves, what happens when you combine a skyscraper with a courtyard? Essentially, what would a court scraper look like? So first we placed the courtyard next to the Helena. We try to preserve all of its views, to be a good neighbor, but also because it is our client's building. And then in the northeast corner, to create density and views, we lifted up to 450 feet, creating this warped perimeter block that has views and sunshine from the west side. And what happens is that you can say traditionally perimeter blocks or courtyards are secrets kept for the tenants. In this case, it really becomes the main facade of the building towards the highway, almost showing how the rejuvenation of the waterfront moves into the city fabric itself. And the walk geometry also brings daylight to the streetscape. And finally, all of the apartments are rotated towards the view, creating this sort of pattern of balconies, but also allowing the residents to recognize their own apartment almost as a building within the building. And of course, people living next to the roof have these nice views of the Hudson. So because of the incredible asymmetry, the courtyard really goes from 42 inches to 400 feet and back down again. So this has been sort of passed forward. It has been sort of well received and according to plan, and sometimes even in architecture things happen according to plan. We should be breaking ground the 1st of September this year. So you can see like some of the sort of architectural evolution we've been conducting in Scandinavia is now starting to crossbreed with sort of New York typologies. To finish off, this is what it could look like driving down the West Side Highway in 4 years.
Yeah, I'm up at Brooklyn, down in Tribeca, right next to the Narrow, but I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra, and since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop in Harlem, all of my Dominicanos right there up on Broadway. Pulled me back to that McDonald's, took it to my stash spot, 560 State Street. Catch me in the kitchen like a Simmons whipping pastry. Statue of Liberty, long live the World Trade, long live the King, yo. I'm from the Empire State.
These streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Let's hear it. New York, New York, New York.
Então, para quem estava assistindo, eu vou só fechar aqui para não ficar. Para quem estava assistindo, qualquer contribuição e comentário que vocês queiram fazer, é só entrar no Twitter. A gente tem a hashtag CheerForPeaceEXPO. Então, hashtag CheerForPeace, e daí em caixa alta, EXPO. Vocês podem entrar lá então e contribuir. Eu vou convidar o Duncan para fazer alguns comentários sobre o vídeo, do que ele falou e do que a gente vai começar a trabalhar hoje. Duncan.
Bueno, com criatividade radical, com sonhos grandes, pelos problemas. E que direi que tudo é possível, não? E que um problema não tem que ser um problema. Para uma cultura também estamos pensando em que o problema é a solução, não? Com ingenuidade também, para a cidade, não? Quando tem um problema e está trabalhando e buscando soluções, não? Então isso foi muitas ideias diferentes de exemplos do mundo. Bueno, podemos passar o link a sua web, que também é muito interessante. E sim.
Eu acho interessante que a gente geralmente quando pensa em arte, é bem o que o Duncan falou, a gente pensa muito em quadros, até mesmo literatura, mas a parte da arquitetura, então, do nosso dia a dia, do que a gente vê no centro urbano, também é considerado arte, né? Mas então fica o questionamento para vocês. A gente vai estar agora às 2 horas da tarde entrando em contato com o DJ lá de São Francisco, o Mike Bubler. Ele estava presente no Give and Game da Rocinha, e ele vai estar dando uma ideia da gente agora, então, do que é a arte musical nessa mudança de problemas e soluções também. Aqui a gente viu um pedacinho, então, da estética e também de novas tecnologias, ajudando essa parte de problemas nas cidades do futuro. E a gente vai falar então um pouquinho como que a música também traz esse benefício. E a gente aguarda de vocês então os comentários e as perguntas, para a gente vai estar então entrando no ar novamente às 2h da tarde.
E também vamos falar com David Smith, outra vez, de Dublin, Irlanda. E vamos falar sobre a literatura e o mundo da arte de ideias. E como as ideias podem cambiar o chip. Em espanhol, cambiar o chip, não? Para click, para change the channel, não? Das cerebros de pessoas. Mas porque Dublin, minha cidade, é a cidade de James Joyce, o escritor famoso, e seu livro Ulysses, não? Foi chispa, tipo de revolução no mundo da literatura, não? Para a deconstrução da ideia, o que é um livro, não? Que são as regras e para romper os muros, para abrir a arte para um terreno novo, não? Isso, bueno, David. Durante o dia vamos ver alguns documentários, filmes sobre temas diferentes da arte. Mais tarde eu vou apresentar alguns projetos de minha experiência em países diferentes. E também amanhã aqui em Curitiba vamos a uma noite, vamos a um bar no centro, São Francisco, para um mic aberto sobre um evento de poesia. Então vamos falar com alguns poetas e pessoas interessantes aqui em Curitiba amanhã para a noite.
Então fica o convite para todos vocês também, quem estiver aqui por Curitiba. Amanhã vai ter noite da poesia ali no Bar do Torto, ali no Lar da Ordem. Vocês